you have to be prepared for the market to change. It goes back to how important it is to have good documents prepared by qualified lawyers when you're putting together a real estate syndication.
Utah Magazine selected him as Utah's legal elite for 10 years in a row now. He was awarded the Distinguished Real Property Practitioner by the Utah State Board.
The really good sponsors are the ones who know that if they perform well for their investors, those investors will come with them to the next project. Syndication is nothing more than a group of investors pooling their resources together to invest in a single investment or asset. If you're not comfortable reviewing the investment documents before you make your investment, it's well worth it to pay an attorney $1,000 to read them carefully. Because a lot of people buy into an investment opportunity because they are drawn to the charisma of the sponsor, the excitement of the sponsor. They can see the enthusiasm. They're led to say, I want to believe what he's saying. I want to be part of this because of the sponsor. I believe in him or her. They're great. Let's participate. And then if the sponsor gets incarcerated, dies, disabled, what do you do?
Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Fundication Show. Today we have a really decorated real estate attorney here in the state of Utah, Mr. Paxton Guyman. Hello, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Paxton is the general counsel for Edge Homes. He has a couple of great awards that we want to talk about too. Utah Magazine selected him as Utah's legal elite for 10 years in a row now. So that's pretty impressive. And he was awarded the Distinguished Real Property Practitioner in 2019 by the Utah State Board. So just a couple things to mention. There was a lot of things in your bio that I was like, oh, that's good, and that's good, and that's good. But we'll just give him the top two for now.
I like that.
Thank you for being here. We want to ask you basically how you got where you are and talk about your background. And so would you give us the 60 to 90 second version of what brought you to this point in your life?
Sure, happy to do that. So at a very young age, I went to a real estate school. I got my sales agent license at the age of 21 and started trying to sell homes at a young age. Fun, exciting, not easy to do when you're that young. People don't want to invest their biggest money investment with someone who's that young. So I found that to be challenging, but it did get me very interested in real estate purchases, helping others, investing. Then I decided to focus on school and I went to law school. In law school, I took all the real estate courses I could, from development to financing to all sorts of land use issues. And really my law practice, which I've been doing now for 24 years, has focused on real estate. I've been a little bit unique in my law practice in that I've done both transactional work, putting deals together, putting investments together, helping people acquire projects, as well as litigation work. So I've done all sorts of court work, jury trials, bench trials, arbitration hearings. Most of the time, the subject of those disputes has been real estate. Some sort of a real estate matter, investor partnerships that have gone awry and partners are suing each other. But it's given me a very broad range of exposure to both sides of real estate, putting deals together and then dealing with the carnage when deals fall apart and people start suing each other. About a year and a half ago, one of my biggest clients, Edge Homes, asked me to join them as in-house counsel. So that's what I'm doing now. My primary day job is as general counsel for one of Utah's biggest and best home builders. I still have a fair number of sort of side clients that I help from time to time, and I'm very involved personally still in real estate investments. So I am happy to be here, share with you some of the information I've put together, and hopefully share some funny stories as well.
Perfect. And I understand you're a passive real estate investor as well, so we're definitely going to want to dig into that after we get through some
I've
material.
worn both hats. I've been involved in investments where I'm one of the sponsors or the managers, more actively involved in the real estate investment, as well as those where I'm just investing my money and hoping that those in charge can actually turn it into something worthwhile with a good return.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Paxton, you have such a dynamic background when it comes to real estate, and you're well known here locally. I feel like with a lot of people that are in the real estate world, they know who you are because you've been in so many different aspects, and especially representing Edge now. They're a very large organization here locally, very well known. I've dealt with them personally on multiple transactions, and I've felt like they're one of the better to work with from a licensed agent standpoint and from my buyer standpoint. And part of that I would probably relate to how they run their business. And I'm curious, how much influence have you had on the legal side in how they run things there?
Well, I wouldn't say that they've done anything differently because of me, but I've been very involved in seeing how they do business and how they treat agents. What's interesting is during the COVID time when prices were just jumping out of control and appreciation was occurring at record-breaking paces, most home builders in the state decided to cut back on the commissions they were paying to sales agents.
Right.
Because they basically said these properties are selling themselves. We don't need to offer a 3% buyer's agent commission to other buyers. Edge Homes never changed their commission structure. They always offered the full commission to any buyer's agent that was bringing a buyer to the table. And I think that was well received. I think a lot of agents and brokers in the market said, wow, that's the only builder who's still treating us like we're bringing value to the table. And I think that's indicative of their culture as a company. They try to do what's right. And we've seen that recently. You might have seen in the news, it was essentially an earth slide. The whole hillside collapsed, and you saw that dramatic footage of 2 homes falling off the back.
Were those both Edge Homes?
Those were both Edge Homes, constructed back in 2021. And Edge said, we're not going to worry about who's at fault right now. We're going to do what's right for our home buyers. They bought those homes back at essentially full market value. Not what the buyers paid for them originally, but the price that they're worth now, today. And that's really unheard of. To have a home builder say, we're going to do what's right to our buyers and treat them right. They put up a number of the homeowners in temporary housing so that they felt safe until the hillside was stabilized.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. I mean, we're not here promoting Edge Homes in any way, but I will say that the other thing they did that was different than a lot of builders is when prices and costs started going a little bit out of control when it came to materials, a lot of builders were bumping up the price on buyers midway through their build, and Edge never did that. Huge opportunity, and yeah, I can see why you're there and why you're representing them, but you've also dealt with some really challenging things, and this is after a long career in litigation. Many times in litigation, the only person that wins is the attorneys, right? When does it make sense to move forward to litigation?
Well, there are a number of factors you have to consider. I've always said litigation is the absolute worst way to resolve disputes, but sometimes it's the only way.
Yeah.
And it typically pertains to who are you dealing with on the other side? Who is your dispute with? If you have reasonable minds on both sides of a dispute and reasonable attorneys involved, I believe 9 out of 10 times you can come together and figure out a sensible resolution to avoid the litigation process. But sometimes you have people involved in disputes who are irrational. They just can't see past the issues. They get caught up on something, they get their egos involved, they try to prove a point, and so you end up in litigation. Now, when is it worth it? Well, that's a case-by-case question. And you have to ask yourself, how much is at stake? If I win, what's the likelihood of recovery? A lot of people don't understand this. They think, well, if I win the lawsuit, the other side just automatically has to pay the judgment and I come out ahead. That is just not how it works.
Right.
Unfortunately, I have seen cases where people will go through the full litigation process, 1.5 years, 2 years of litigation, get a judgment, and then never collect on it. Why? Because the judgment debtor, the party against whom the judgment was entered, has no assets. They're judgment proof.
Yeah.
You definitely want to take that into account up front. You want to try to figure out if it's ever going to pay off, if it's worth it to sue. Because even if you win, man, if a judgment's not collectible, it's worth nothing.
Yeah.
So you want to ask yourself those questions. You have to look at your own life too. Litigation is stressful, it's expensive, it's a distraction. You know, what sort of opportunity costs are you going to miss out on? Opportunities will you miss out on because you're focused on litigation and spending your time preparing for a deposition and producing documents and getting ready for trial. All that time and energy spent on litigation takes you away from the things you normally do to make money, to be happy, to spend the time the way you want to. You have to consider those factors. Litigation is not great. You surrender control to attorneys, to a judge, to a jury, to the rules of procedure, the rules of evidence. And I've often said, even if all the facts and the law and the witnesses are all on your side, everything is stacked in your favor, you still have about a 20% chance of losing because of the element of human error. Things go wrong. An attorney might make a mistake. You might have a judge or a jury who just doesn't see things your way. So it is a high-risk endeavor. It can be super expensive. These days, when you file a lawsuit, it probably takes 2 years before you'll get to trial. Mm-hmm. And in the course of that 2-year period, you could easily run up legal fees of $200,000 or $300,000. So you have to ask yourself, is the dispute worth it? I am a huge fan of what's called mediation. Mediation, you might know what this is. Essentially, you hire a third party neutral, a mediator, to come in and try to help the parties understand their positions, the strengths, the weaknesses of their respective arguments and claims, and bridge the gap. Find a solution that eliminates the litigation risk. Get out of that litigation process. I serve as a mediator. I've mediated dozens of cases. I'm a true believer in the process. And I mean, I did one just last Friday, and it was great at the end of the day to see the parties actually give each other hugs and say, I'm glad we got this resolved. It didn't have to go to court. If you've got two sides who are willing to come in, each side pays half the cost of the mediator, each side sets aside a day, that indicates a willingness on both sides to try to find a solution, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. And if you have two people who are willing to explore opportunities for a settlement, and you employ creative powers and looking at outside of the box solutions, you can come up with settlements. Which I like, because in court, if you go to trial, you don't have that option of coming up with creative solutions. You're limited to what the law allows. Yeah. And oftentimes the law doesn't really cover all the different issues and provide all the right remedies. So, but in a mediation where you can control the process and have creativity, you can come up with solutions that everybody is either happy with or equally unhappy with. And sometimes that's the sign of a good settlement. Both sides walk away equally unhappy.
I think from a real estate perspective, at least for me, oftentimes me as a licensed professional, I'm more about managing the emotions than anything else. And if you get somebody that gets stuck on principle, for example, we just recently had a transaction where $2 million in real estate almost fell apart because of a $2,500 issue.
Wow.
And luckily, I was able to keep all the parties just thinking about the overall big picture. What are some ways that you come in as an attorney when people are already in that position where they probably think they're right or there's a principle that's been violated? How do you get them to kind of set the principle of it aside and just deal with the real facts of it?
It is a challenge sometimes, because oftentimes when clients are out shopping for an attorney, they are looking for an attorney who will agree with them, who will say, yes, you're right, 100%. I see your point. We're going to take this case and win. Unfortunately, some of those attorneys are really looking out at the best way to line their own pockets. They see a client who's upset. They want to churn the fees, turn it into a 2-year litigation process, and make as much money as they can. I really dislike that approach. Good attorneys, ethical attorneys, they will take the time to talk with the client, understand the issues, and do their very best to help that client understand the risks and the downsides of litigation, and take the emotion out of it and try to be objective. Try to have a truly objective assessment of whether it's even worth it to pursue the claim. Sometimes it is, but you certainly need to try to help the clients take the emotion away and look at it objectively to assess their options.
Yeah. Do you have any stories off the top of your head that maybe are some of your biggest wins that went from the worst case scenario and turned into a positive mediated scenario, like situation where everybody came out either feeling good or equally dissatisfied, like you said?
I do. The story that comes to mind is an unusual case for me, because I typically don't do personal injury cases, but I was involved with a case against Polaris. You've all heard about Polaris: motorcycles, razors, side-by-sides, four-wheelers. There was a very unfortunate accident that occurred where a 13-year-old girl was caught in a Polaris razor that turned on its side and caught fire. And she was burned on over 60% of her body, badly burned. She hired us to represent her. I brought in one of my very good friends who is an excellent personal injury attorney, Jeff Eisenberg, and we worked on the case together. And we hired some experts to look at the machines. We determined that there were truly some defects in the design of the machine, and we were gearing up for litigation. It probably would have been one of those cases that would have taken 2 or 3 years to go through the litigation process to finally get to a jury trial. But we decided early on that the family, the surviving heirs, the parents, really wanted to avoid that process. They were so grief-stricken because their daughter died.
Yeah.
After several months in the burn center at the U of U hospital, the daughter died. Her name was Bailey Holdridge. Be brave, Bailey is a mantra that you'll see online because she was such a brave person going through that. But we ended up deciding to try to do mediation before we even filed the lawsuit. And it worked. We had a great out-of-state mediator come in. It took several days. In fact, we had to do mediation a few days, come back a few later to make a settlement work. And in that particular case, the in-house attorney for Polaris was fair and reasonable and saw the benefits of settling. I can tell you, there's another story that comes to mind if you want to hear. Here locally in the avenues, about 2 feet, the length of the backyard only, so maybe, 70 feet. That was the property in dispute. And both sides had huge emotions at play. They were very much entrenched in their positions, unwilling to even consider the other side's position. And we went through 3 years of litigation, a full trial, and then on a full appeals process. Both sides ended up incurring at least $200,000 in attorney's fees and expert witness costs over a strip of land that could not have been worth more than $7,000 or $8,000 on its own. Unwilling to yield, unwilling to compromise. They end up hurting themselves financially.
I love what you said about, reasons maybe not to litigate, and that this has really been some of the best legal advice I've ever had, that you can actually devil's advocate for litigation and for using an attorney. Are there any circumstances in real estate law where you go, oh, here we go again, they're suing over this or that, where you just think the outcome's not going to be worth it? For our viewers, it's like, this situation, just don't do it. Just walk away. Is there anything like that that's just a red flag?
Yes, absolutely. A case comes to mind. I won't name the parties, but I'll tell you the general scenario. And it dealt with a syndication, a real estate syndication, where an investor invested a large sum of money. The project went south. It was an office building here in Salt Lake County. The investor didn't make much money. In fact, they had a pretty big loss. They actually did not make any money. They had a pretty big loss in the end of that. And they sued one of the people who was in charge, one of the persons who was one of the sponsors, the managers of the project. Well, when investors don't get their money back, they come up with every conceivable claim they can to say that it was someone else's fault. It's not just a bad investment. And that particular investor was out of New York. He sued my client, alleged all sorts of claims of misrepresentation, fraud, self-dealing, the types of claims that you would see. And the truth of the matter is, it was just an investment that didn't pan out. The market turned, debts were called due. It was just an unfortunate situation. But we still had to go through a full lawsuit. The investor was unwilling to drop it. And when you see claims like that, it's pretty easy to go back to the investment documents, if the documents are done correctly, and say, look, we disclosed these risks. We disclosed how the investment was going to play out. You understood the risks and took those voluntarily. And now that the investment didn't turn out well, unfortunately, you still want to get your money back as if there was never a risk at all. And that's just not how it works. So in that case, we ended up going to a jury trial in federal court. And the jury came back and said, there's just no evidence of fraud. There was no misrepresentation. There's certainly not a misrepresentation that you relied upon in making your investment. And so the guy got no caused, which means zero. He didn't get anything after going through that whole litigation process.
So you have a slim to none chance of really getting anything out of that scenario.
So not only did he lose the money that was lost on the deal, now he lost all the money that he
With the legal
invested
fees.
to sue.
It's called throwing good money after bad, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some people are so upset by the loss that that clouds their judgment.
Yeah.
And they want to do anything they can to get their money back. And sometimes they end up spending and wasting more money. But I'll make a point there. It goes back to how important it is to have good documents prepared by qualified lawyers. When you're putting together a real estate syndication, you know, everybody knows what that means, right? Syndication is nothing more than a group of investors pooling their resources together to invest in a single investment or asset. And you can have anywhere from 3 or 5 investors up to 100 investors. And there are different rules that apply depending on the number of investors who are involved, but you need to have very well prepared governing documents for the investment. They typically include a private placement memo, a subscription agreement, disclosures about the nature of the investment, the risks, what role each investor plays, whether they have any voting rights or not, how the managers or the sponsors are paid, because some deals, the sponsors get a preferred return or a percentage off the top before any money gets paid back to the investors. Every deal is different. It's not a one-size-fits-all way of doing business.
So you've written a checklist, right, of what to look for in a syndicator, what to look for in an investment. What are, I'm sure, PPM, subscription agreement, making sure they verify you as an accredited investor, those types of things are all in there. Can we go through that
Sure.
and talk about what you've put together?
Yeah, so in thinking about coming onto this podcast and sharing some thoughts, I put together a list of what I consider the key questions to ask yourself. And the list that I put together is a list of issues that you need to take into account and be comfortable with as an investor. Coincidentally, they also are effective for any sort of a sponsor or manager to consider as well. They need to think about these issues and make sure they know the answers to these questions. A lot of people get so excited about the investment opportunity and the potential returns that they don't take the time to slow down and say, okay, great, this looks like a good opportunity, but let's make sure we know what we're getting into. And so I put together some of these questions. Let me just share some with you. The very first question is, are you coming into this investment as a lender or an equity partner? In other words, what's the nature of your investment? And that's very key. If you're coming in and you're basically loaning money, you want to make sure you have strong collateral. You want to make sure you have a deed of trust against the property, a promissory note, maybe even a personal guarantee. If you're loaning money, you want to make sure you have all the right loan documents in place to protect you. The mediation that I referred to last Friday, where the parties ended up hugging and everything turned out okay, it involved just this situation where somebody made a loan but never got it documented. They didn't get any personal guarantees. They didn't get a deed of trust. There was literally zero collateral. I mean, that is just so risky. It's basically like giving someone money and saying, do what you want with it. I sure hope I get some of it back at some point.
Yeah.
So ask yourself, are you coming in as a lender or an equity partner? If you're coming in as an equity partner, there are a whole long list of issues you got to consider. Would you like me to share some of those?
Yeah, and I want to just add, and I'm sure you'll back me up on this, because being in real estate for as long as I have, if you are coming in as a lender, you need to understand where you fall in line with your lien position. Because
Right.
many people, they think, oh, I'm secured against the property, but they don't realize if this property is over leveraged with the other liens that are there, you're still kind of putting, money out there hoping you get it back at some point.
Great point, Christian. So I personally do a lot of real estate lending. It's just, I'm comfortable doing loans. I'm very comfortable putting together loan documents. I always find out, first of all, am I going to be in first position as a deed of trust? Am I going to first lien position against the property? If so, that's great. Because if there's enough value in the property, and I'll typically say maybe I'll loan up to 70% loan to value. So on $1 million property, I'd loan $700,000, no more. If I'm in first lien position, I feel comfortable with that collateral. Because if everything goes south, there's still a cushion. I'm still going to get my money back, even if I have to do a foreclosure sale, right?
Right.
But if you're in second lien position or third or fourth, I've seen all of that, you are at risk, because if the senior lender has to foreclose, your options as a junior position lender are pretty limited. You either have to buy out that senior position or risk having your lien wiped out and having no collateral at all.
Right.
That's risky. There are a few instances when I'm willing to loan in second or third position, but there has to be so much collateral, a very strong personal guarantee, limited conditions, limited circumstances for that.
Yeah.
As far as the equity investments go, if you're coming in as an equity investor, a passive investor in some sort of a real estate syndication, you need to know a few critical things. First and foremost, how do capital calls work? This is really key. A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to invest this money into this project. I'm not going to take the time to read the investor documents and the operating agreement and everything like that. I'm just going to put up this investment, hope everything goes well. And they don't understand that they're actually at risk for more than just their initial capital investment, because the governing documents can give the sponsors and the managers the right to impose a capital call. A capital call is a forced capital raise, where the manager or the sponsor says, look, this project isn't going so well. We've had some unexpected costs. We need to raise some additional money. So I'm going to impose a $2 million capital call, which for each of you 20 investors means $100,000 each. And you have to pay it within the next 60 days, right? Well, if you don't understand that that's a risk you're taking, you might not be prepared to pay that capital call. And then the agreement can provide for different draconian remedies. Sometimes it's just you get diluted, and then there's sort of a recalculation of everybody's interests, and your ownership percentage goes down.
So what are some of the draconian ones? Because that's what.
So the draconian one, I tell you, I have seen provisions in operating agreements, investment documents, where the failure to pay a capital call means that you can forfeit your interest. Now, I would want to challenge that legally and say that's just not fair. But I've seen provisions that say that you literally lose your interest in the project. You take a zero position because you don't pay your capital call. I can understand why people who put these documents together want to have some real teeth, some consequences if you don't pay your share of the capital call, but that's pretty harsh. I've also seen it where you can be sued. In other words, if you don't pay your portion of the capital call, they can sue you and either force you to pay it or get a judgment against you for not paying it.
We've seen some recently where they're being essentially charged 18% on the money that they don't contribute.
Right.
And it could be more, right? It could be any amount. So now all of a sudden you already put money in and now you're starting to get being charged on the money that you haven't put in. Because when you invest in an equity position, you become a partner in that deal. You are a part of the company now. And so whichever decision is decided upon, you now have to meet your portion of.
We're going to see a lot of capital calls in the next few years.
They're happening.
Let me tell you why. Especially in commercial properties and in apartment projects. I want to talk just a second about apartment projects. As you know, apartment projects have just been all the craze for investors. But we're seeing a real change in the market right now. And that is, we're seeing an oversupply of apartment units coming on for production, being delivered to the market. At a time when interest rates are rising, people are feeling the pinch. I reviewed a report just recently showing that the vacancy percentage in Salt Lake County market for mid-2023, so just 4 or 5 months ago, was over 5.5% vacancy rate. It has not been that high in a decade. So the last time the vacancy rate was that high was in 2016. Yeah. What's more concerning about that is the number of units coming to the market that are under construction right now. So we've seen on average in the Salt Lake market, 3,500 units per year coming into the market. Next year and the year after, it's projected to be double that at a time when we're seeing higher vacancies. So why is this concerning? Well, for a few reasons. There's a lot of projects that are under construction right now that are going to find it hard to lease up those projects when they hit the market. They're also going to have a hard time getting permanent financing. So oftentimes you get permanent financing at the time you get your construction loan. Sometimes you don't. In fact, oftentimes you have to show that you've reached a certain level of occupancy before you qualify to get permanent financing. And that's going to be a challenge for those projects to get permanent financing at fair rates. The other problem that we're seeing is a lot of apartment projects were doing so well in the golden years leading up to the recession or imminent recession that we might be in. And they're making so much money on these apartment projects, and then interest rates got so low in 2019 and 2020 and even 2021 that they refinanced those apartment projects, took out as much equity as they could, but most of those loans they took out during that period have a 5-year balloon payment, which means after the first 5 years of that refinance loan, they have to come up with new financing. Well, think about that. So 2019, 2020, 2021, when they're all refinancing their apartments, taking out the largest loans they can, they now have to refinance those 5 years later, 2024, 2025, 2026. They're not going to be able to do it because interest rates are now so much higher and they're not going to be able to meet the demand. So what is that going to do? Most likely, the owners of those projects are going to have to come out of pocket to pay down their current debt load enough to qualify for a new loan at a higher interest rate. That makes such a difference to the interest rate. So I think we're going to see some distressed apartment project sales coming up in the next few years. And I'm not sure that you really want to put your money into a new apartment project at this stage.
Let's talk about the dichotomy there, because you also represent the largest home builder, and you guys have stayed steady on your building as far as I could tell, because we have a housing shortage when it comes to single family homes. So how is it that we can have a housing shortage here and have an oversupply over here?
Yeah, good question. Basically, it's because too many apartment projects are coming online right now. So I'm talking about an oversupply of apartment, multifamily rental units. The same is not true for single family homes or townhomes that are for sale. Anything that's for sale, we have a shortage of. The American dream is still, we want to own our own house. We don't want to have to deal with a landlord. We don't want to be forced to move out. We don't want arbitrary rental rate increases. We want to own our own house and have the protection and the security that comes with that. And, at Edge Homes, we're still selling almost 100 homes a month, which is shocking to people when they hear that. Now, we've had to buy down their mortgage interest rates. We've had to offer some, seller credits at closing so they can still qualify and make it work. But what that tells me is that there is still a lot of demand to own your own house, whether it's a condominium, a townhouse, or a single family home. There's a lot of demand. And unfortunately, because interest rates have gotten so high, a lot of that demand is sitting on the sidelines. They're just hoping and praying the interest rates will come down enough that they can then qualify and jump on and close.
So this brings up another article that I've seen in the news about a new bill that's being proposed to take hedge funds out of owning single-family residences. Have you seen much about that? And do you think that there's any merit to it? And if so, how would that affect the market? I mean, they're proposing that they force all hedge funds, which I don't know at what point you are considered a hedge fund versus a syndicator, but essentially to sell off all of their single-family inventory within a 10-year time frame.
I don't think it's a lawful law. I don't think that law could be upheld or enforced. Hedge funds, it's very true that over the last, 5 to 10 years, there's been an enormous push by hedge funds like BlackRock to buy single-family homes and hold them in their portfolio as rental properties. Really, it's because they've seen such a dramatic appreciation, increase in value. They want to take part in that. You've got money saying, we don't want to invest in stocks and bonds. We want to invest directly into housing and get the benefit of the price escalation that's occurred. It is concerning because the more you have consolidated ownership of rental units, the more control they have to essentially dictate rental rates, and they can price people out, they can control the market. I can understand why legislators would perhaps consider passing a law that says you can't do that anymore. I don't know how you can force someone to sell their portfolio though.
Agreed.
If you own property, it's yours. And yes, private property rights continue to get eroded in many ways. But at the core, if I own property, someone should not be able to force me to sell it, whether I'm a hedge fund or a private person or just a family trying to make a go of it.
Yeah.
I don't see those laws working.
And from a principle standpoint, I would say that I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
The more we give oversight of the government to dictate how we can own property, the more scary it becomes.
Absolutely.
Totally agree with you. You want to hear a couple more items on my list? Like if you're
absolutely
considering investing in a project, a real estate project, or really any investment for that matter, you need to know a few things. So the other thing that I put down on my list, and by the way, I understand you're going to make this list available.
Yeah, we'll put this, so there will be a link in the description. We'll make sure that we publish this on the Pre-iShare website so people can see all of this.
So ask yourself before you invest, what sort of financial benefits or incentives does the sponsor or the manager get? This is important because sometimes deals are structured where the only true party that's going to make good money is the sponsor or the manager, and the investors just get whatever crumbs are left over at the end. You need to be aware of this. You've got to read your investor subscription documents and operating agreement carefully and see how they're paid. Do they get a management fee, a development fee, an asset under management fee, AUM? There's all sorts of fees, acquisition fees, exactly. All sorts of fees that are taken off the top. And by the time those are all paid out, the investor's like, well, wait a minute, we're going to get a 4% return on our money, and we took all the risk. That's just not fair. So you need to understand, maybe it's called the cash waterfall. As money comes in, who does it go to? Does it go first to the manager? Does it go first to the debt? Does it go first? How is that going to eventually come down to you? And then what happens upon an exit? When the project is sold, how are the funds paid out? Ask yourself this as well. If somebody is promoting an investment, are they getting paid a commission off of your investment? Do they have ulterior motives? Do they truly have your best interests at heart? Are they trying to get investors to throw in money so that they can collect a large amount of commissions up front and walk away without any risk in the deal? You need to understand that when you're looking at an investment. How does everybody get paid?
Question about that one, actually, and it's a little bit side note, but there's legalities to who can raise money for a project. And if somebody is raising money and getting paid a commission and they don't fall within those rules, what risk are you taking as an investor being involved?
Well, that's interesting. First of all, the person who's taking a commission when they're not legally authorized to do so, they're the primary target for regulators, right? They're getting paid commissions when they don't have the proper licenses, or maybe they haven't given the right disclosures. Whatever it is, they're the ones who are primarily taking on that risk. If you're just the investor and you're investing in the project, I don't know that you really have risk, a liability risk, for having some of your money go to pay a commission that's not authorized under the law. More than anything, you're a victim. You shouldn't be paying commissions to somebody who's not entitled to receive them.
Well, and the reason I ask it is, what will the law state? Because I'm guessing the person taking the commission gets in trouble, but also the sponsor gets in trouble. So does that mean that your money that is invested into this deal, is that deal now at risk because of that situation?
The deal can be at risk. It's interesting you say that. You hear about the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and a lot of investment opportunities are either the kind that must be registered with the SEC or that qualify for an exemption from registration, right? And if you are relying upon the exemptions from registration, you're usually limited to the number of investors. Typically, they have to be accredited investors. The documents have to be set up correctly to qualify for exemption from registration. But if you get involved in a project that does not truly qualify, in other words, they've been accepting money from anybody who will throw it in, they're not following the right disclosure process, they're not just using accredited investors, but people who are just scrounging money, and they definitely don't qualify for that status, the whole project can be at risk, because you can have governmental enforcement or regulatory agencies step in, file complaints, seize assets, appoint a receiver, impose an asset freeze, like I've seen in some cases recently, and suddenly the whole deal is going to fall apart, because the investment, even if it had a chance of success to begin with, it's certainly not going to succeed once it gets the black eye of being the subject of a SEC lawsuit or a Division of Real Estate complaint.
Pre-iShare actually has a program with Pre-iShare approved sponsor program where we look to work with, somewhat vouch for sponsors who check all the boxes legally. They've had great returns. They've got several hundred million asset under management, that type of thing.
That's great.
Do you know of other places where people can get that? Because I think historically it's your own due diligence.
That was one of my items on this list. Google the sponsors.
Yeah.
Do an online research. Ask for referrals of prior investors. See how their experience was with these people, right? Do as much due diligence as you can. I love that your company will do that. They'll do some of that vetting for you.
We'll even do background checks. I mean, we go pretty thorough into these folks just to make sure if we're going to put them on our website, we're going to allow them to, be in front of our list of accredited investors. We can only do so much. We're not guaranteeing their success.
Yeah.
But many people, they get into a deal strictly because their friend told them about it, their cousin was involved in it. Maybe they haven't even seen a payout yet. But, they get involved for various reasons and oftentimes don't know how to do the due diligence, which is why your list is really important.
Right. I'll tell you something, and I'm kind of afraid to admit this. It's embarrassing. I was this close to investing in a scam artist. I had the documents prepared. I was making a loan. Everything seemed to work. I did my own analysis of the property, the status of title. I contacted the city to make sure I verified the status of the development entitlements for the project. I did my due diligence. My dear wife, to her credit, said, hey, let's ask one of our friends down there who's heavily involved in the St. George real estate market what he knows about this guy that we're going to loan this money to. And literally the day I was supposed to close on that loan, this friend of ours in St. George calls my wife back and says, do not loan money to that guy. You have no idea the trouble he's caused down here. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know it, right? Because it was a market that I'm not in that often. It's St. George. I'm usually up here. And sure enough, as we found out, did some additional research, the concerns were legitimate. So fortunately, we're able to pull the plug. But even me, as an experienced attorney who's seen everything, who teaches people how to look out for bad investments, what to stay away from, and how to be careful with your due diligence, even I was this close to getting sucked in to a scam. Mm. And how would it have turned out? Well, who knows? If I had actually made that loan, I want to think I would have still had a valid lien against the property, but I probably would have had to foreclose. There may have been some other liens out there that I wasn't aware of. I mean, it could have been disastrous. So I don't know. There are so many people, especially in real estate. I don't know what it is about the real estate markets. You attract brilliant people who know how to do wonderful things and be successful. They also attract scam artists who are looking to cut corners, take other people's money, line their own pockets with no integrity whatsoever. You really have to be on the lookout. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference, at least up front.
Really unfortunate, yeah.
So, a couple other things if you want to know. Are there any actions that require investor approval, or do investors truly have no control or say? So I would like to say that the best way to invest in a project is where you have certain safeguards in place, right? Like the main asset can't be sold unless the sell terms are approved by a majority of the investors. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a sponsor, you don't want to give up that kind of control. You want to say, I'm the manager, I'm the sponsor, I'm going to decide what's best. But it may be better off as an investor to say, well, wait a minute, if I'm going to put up $500,000, $250,000, I want to make sure I've got some say in how the asset is handled at the end, what the exit's going to look like. So ask yourself that question. Do the investor documents give me a vote, any sort of investor approval requirements that protect us and not just leave it all up to the discretion of the manager or the sponsor? It's a good question.
Can you do that and still be passive?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You can still be a passive investor because you're not involved in the day-to-day management.
Okay.
Well, I'm talking about certain threshold activities like are you going to be able to take out a loan against the asset for more than just refinancing the current debt, right? Is somebody going to take out equity? Well, maybe that should require investor approval. Are you going to sell the entire project? And if so, that's one of those events where I think investor approval or some level of consent or voting requirement should be provided.
Because oftentimes the interests aren't aligned, right? So the interests of the investors who originally got into the deal, they were expecting a certain amount of return over a certain amount of time and then an exit, when the market was best. Whereas sometimes if the sponsor is, in a situation in their life where they really just want to see that exit so that they can move on to another project, those interests may not be aligned. And I think that's really an important case to look at.
Right. Right. The other thing to keep in mind that's on my list here is, can you stay in this for the long haul? If you're going to invest a large sum of money, is it money that you can truly live without for an extended period of time? Far too often, people get so excited about the potential return that they borrow money from their line of credit to make the investment. And then they're stuck making these monthly payments on the line of credit or some other obligation, hoping that it pays off in a year, and then the project turns out to be a 4 or 5 year project. Do you have the staying power? Does it make sense to participate in this investment? And the reason is that when you're making, if you're involved in a real estate syndication, you're investing some money, there's usually not a market for that. There's usually not a market of buyers ready to take you out if you want to sell. And most real estate syndication documents, they provide for rights of first refusal. You can't go sell it to anybody without first offering it to the existing investors or to the manager. There's procedures to be followed. There's consent requirements to be satisfied in order to sell your interest. And oftentimes, you take a haircut. If you're going to sell a minority position in an LLC, most likely you're selling it because you need the money. And so you might have to sell it at a discount to get whatever you can, as opposed to having the wherewithal to stay through it through the long haul and get the full benefit of your return at the end.
Well, that's so prevalent right now in today's market for two reasons that I want to mention. First of all, a lot of deals that were originally slated as 2 to 3 year deals are now turning into 5 year, 7 year, or 10 year. And so a lot of people that were in that position, and maybe they invested for a specific reason, and that timeline was really designed to put their kids through college or whatever the scenario is, they need that money. Second of all, pre-iShare, right? We're new to the market, and what we've done is created a secondary marketplace to where people can list their LP shares and they can bring it to the market rather than, like you said, go back to their sponsor and say, will you please buy me out at what I bought in at, or maybe at a discount. Now they can go out there and get some sort of an angle of what is this really worth in today's market and start their negotiations from there.
Right. You're right. I love that you guys have that opportunity. You think about that up front. You sort of contemplate, okay, if people want to get bought out early rather than staying in to the end. Here's how we're going to handle that.
Yeah.
That's a very good way to do it.
And we are talking to a lot of people who historically, our CEO put this whole idea into play because he said, people will say, my wife has cancer, or I need the new Ferrari, or so forth, is kind of his pitch on that. And most of the people that I'm talking to right now that are interested in using that service, it is because our sponsor let us know, hey, there's going to be years added onto this. And I don't necessarily need the cash right now, but I don't know if I'm willing to do the time.
I made an investment about a year and a half ago where it looked like a great opportunity. I took money off of a line of credit of one of our investment properties that my wife and I have and invested that. Just easy way to do it, cash flow management. Well, I took that money out of the line of credit when the interest rate was 4%. Now it's 8.5%. So I don't want to wait another 2 or 3 years for that investment to pay off. So I actually sold a different asset to pay off that line of credit. That's really not what I wanted to do, but it made more sense given the increase in interest rates, right, on the line of credit. So I talk from experience about this. I think everybody can say, man, I wish I wouldn't have put so much money in that investment when I did. You have to be prepared for the market to change and be able to stay in for the long haul. Otherwise, you're going to have to sell off other assets to cover the liability.
And some people don't have the option of selling off another asset. And this is where we want to provide some sort of solution. And we really think it's a great one. And the beautiful part about it is it's being embraced by the sponsors as well. Because many of these sponsors, they have their documents written a certain way, know who's in the deal with them and everything else. But it's not because they really want to tie the hands of their investors. So far, all the conversations we're having with sponsors, they're saying, yes, we would allow this liquidity feature because it takes the pressure off of them to give liquidity to somebody when they're probably focused on keeping their current transaction moving forward, let alone possibly out there buying more.
Right.
Not only how do we allow, but how can I tell my investors that this is not an option that I support?
I like that you set it up that way. That's very good.
Yeah.
Nobody makes an investment because they want to lose money, right? Passive investors, they are all hoping for a good return.
Right.
And sometimes that hope, that greed, if you will, the greed for money, for a good return, clouds judgment, and people end up investing more than they really can afford to invest. And if there's one word of caution I would give to anybody out there who's looking at doing investments, it's this: invest only what you could actually afford to lose. Yeah. I look even in my own life, I've done far better on projects where I was investing in myself, deals that I had control over. The investments I've made where I've relinquished control, unfortunately, have not turned out that well. And everybody comes in with glassy eyes and excitement, but so many investors, unfortunately, end up not getting the return they wanted.
Yeah. So true.
Hire an attorney too. If you're not comfortable reviewing the investment documents before you make your investment, it's well worth it to pay an attorney $1,000 to read them carefully and give you good advice on whether there are some concerns in the documents that you might not fully understand.
I think everybody always says, we're going to give you time to talk to your legal counsel, talk to, your licensed professionals. And many people just don't do it. And part of it is they don't want to be talked out of this potential return.
Right.
And this is where I see people get in the most trouble in real estate is sometimes they won't go tell somebody that they trust because they don't want to lose the opportunity or have somebody else, get involved.
That's so true.
And instead they end up in a much worse scenario than if they would just go to somebody that can at least give them an outside perspective.
Yeah. So many people are latching onto the dream of a successful investment. They don't want to talk to people who might say, maybe you should step back and reconsider.
Yeah.
Right? It's unfortunate.
Yeah. Just human nature and happens all the time.
It does.
Yeah, I agree. I think looking for that, why shouldn't I do this, is super valuable.
Right.
So let's jump back into your checklist here.
Okay. I was just looking over it, and we've covered quite a lot of these, actually.
Well, one of the ones that stuck out to me, and I'm not finding it right here, but you talked about what happens if the sponsor gets sued or passes away or loses control of that asset in some form or fashion. So maybe speak to that one, because I think many people don't think about that. And that's one of the first things you should think of is if you're relying on this one person to finalize this transaction, we all know that life is short, and it's really unfortunate that death sometimes comes so suddenly. So what's your advice there? What do you look for in some sort of succession plan?
Wow. It's a good thing to know up front, because a lot of people they buy into an investment opportunity because they are drawn to the charisma of the sponsor, the excitement of the sponsor. They can see the enthusiasm. They're led to say, I want to believe what he's saying, or he or she. I want to be part of this because of the sponsor. I believe in him or her. They're great. Let's participate. And then if the sponsor gets incarcerated, dies, disabled, what do you do? I mean, who's going to step up? Hopefully the investment documents provide for a way, preferably with investor approval, for who's going to take over that spot. Sometimes you'll have, life insurance, but life insurance on somebody like Keyman Insurance, on somebody like that, that's not going to make your investments back. It's not going to be enough. So you really have to make sure that whoever's going to take over that role is truly qualified. And I don't really know the best way to mitigate that risk, because I'm trying to think if I've ever seen a set of investment documents that say clearly up front, if this person, the president, the manager, the sponsor, passes away or becomes incapacitated or can't otherwise serve in that role, how is the successor going to be chosen?
Yeah.
There probably are some provisions. They're just not really coming to mind.
Well, and I'll tell you from my perspective, now that we've interviewed a lot of different real estate syndicators and some really good ones, some of the ones that stand out to me are the ones that have a fully integrated team.
Right.
Meaning they have in-house property management, they have in-house development team, they have in-house essentially everything. And so if the key person passes away, then second in charge could stand in line and still make those decisions
seamlessly
moving forward.
Seamlessly, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good point, Christian, is that if the person you're investing in, because a lot of us invest in the person, not just the company.
Yeah.
I'm investing in this person because I believe in her. If everything is set up to rely on one person and there's not a backup team, there's not an organization, then that might be a red flag. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's not the best deal to go into.
And sometimes it's just a time to pause and think, right?
Right.
Not necessarily good or bad, or you got to get out of the deal just because of it, but you have to understand the risks you're getting into. If you're making any decision for investments, you have to understand the full picture so that you know those risks that you're taking on.
Right.
I think that's how this originally came about when we were at lunch the other day.
It is.
Talking about making sure you're going in eyes wide open.
Eyes wide open.
Yeah.
Ask yourself before you make an investment, try and come up with a comprehensive list of everything that could go wrong. Put on your negative cynicism, the most cynical hat you can, and say, what is everything possible that could go wrong? And if you can come up with that list and say, okay, I'm still willing to go forward, maybe that's a good exercise to engage in.
Yeah. So I'd love to switch angles a little bit now. Okay. We're talking mostly about passive investors, but you've also helped set up a lot of partnerships and different, maybe syndications. What are some of the things that person should be thinking about who's deciding to move to the next level in their investing career? I think many of the investors, they start at the level of, maybe they're doing, single properties or smaller, multifamily or commercial on their own.
Right.
And then they start bringing in partners, and they get to the point where they realize that they need to go really big. And so they have to bring in all of these other essentially partners involved in the transaction. So what are those steps, and what are the things they should think about when they're partnering with somebody else? And then what are the steps they should think about when they decide to go full syndication?
First and foremost, make sure you've got a great attorney to help you document everything clearly. Where people get in trouble, and I've seen this, is they just get out ahead of themselves. They get out over their skis. They try to do too much without slowing down and making sure everything is properly documented, with a clear understanding of who does what are the consequences. People get into deals, they're trying to do too much, and before you know it, verbal understandings get misconstrued, people don't fulfill their duties, you end up in a dispute. If you're gonna grow, if you're gonna become a sponsor, set yourself up correctly to succeed. Don't try to do too much at once. Make sure you pay attention to the details. Make sure you think about things like, okay, I'm going to bring on some partners and investors. What are we going to do if they need to be bought out? Mm-hmm. What's the liquidity? How are we going to handle that? Maybe consider a buy-sell provision where if there's a dispute You set the price, and I decide whether to sell or buy at that price. I love that provision. Have a mechanism in place, right?
And before you move on from your first topic, how does somebody choose a good attorney? Because we all know that there's great attorneys out there, and there's also attorneys out there that they do kind of set their business up in a way that they can continually charge fees, not necessarily based on the value that they're bringing to that partnership.
Right.
But what are some of those questions they should ask when they're out there seeking counsel to be on their side?
I think the best thing you can do is ask other people who have done what you're trying to do, and what attorneys did they use? What was your experience like? There's nothing better than a referral from somebody who's already used an attorney for a similar situation. Did they do a good job? Was their billing fair? Were they responsive? Those are the questions to ask.
Find somebody successful and then find out who they've used.
Who they've been using.
Smart.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. I guess other concerns, make sure you have, if you're starting down this road of being a sponsor, make sure you've got enough staff to help you to do it right. You can't do everything on your own. You just can't. Hire good people, hire talented, build up a team around you so that you can be efficient and effective.
Yeah. The best sponsors that we've talked to that have scaled to large, we're talking $500 million, $1 billion or more in assets. Most of them are fully integrated, like we're talking about. They have a really good team, and many of them have staff that are pretty substantial. I mean, we're talking 50 to 100 or more employees that are on staff. And sometimes they're only running, a few projects with that many people on their staff.
Right. I look at one of the companies here in Utah called Save Refund. Have you ever heard of Save Refund?
We have, yeah.
They specialize in buying restaurants, brands, and growing those brands and then selling them as an exit. And the main guy there, a genius guy, charismatic leader, wonderful guy. There's no way he could do this on his own. He has built a team around him that is so talented, such incredibly experienced, smart, hardworking, devoted individuals. That's why that's been so successful. I mean, they've had incredible projects that have done really, really well.
Yeah.
And it's because the main guy took the time to hire talented individuals around him and have a team that can really pull off big deals.
Got it.
It pays off in spades.
Yeah. Well, I think we've gone through, kind of the worst case scenario all the way to how to set yourself up initially and make sure you're thinking it through in the first place. Is there any other key points of advice that you would give? Let's say that your children are deciding that they're going to get into real estate, either as a passive investor or as a sponsor. What are some of the things that you would want to sit down and make sure they know?
If you have debts to pay off, if you've got a 12% credit card debt, you're much better off paying that down than you are investing money in a risky enterprise. Because when you pay down 12% debt, you're getting a guaranteed 12% return, right? Pay down your debts. Let's see what they've done in the past. Let's talk with prior investors. Let's really do some due diligence together. Let's minimize the risk. Take the emotion out of it. Calculate your risks. Try to be objective. It's just so easy. It happens all the time. People say, I want to get involved in real estate investing. They talk to their cousin over Thanksgiving dinner. I've got a great investment. You should put it in. Okay, where do I write the check to? It happens all the time. And look at the risk.
Sure, there's ample opportunity. And besides people who, by word of mouth, are there any venues you know of, or what have you used in the past to research where am I going to put my investments? Is it usually the people you know?
Or no, people I trust. Yeah.
There's very few ways that you can get a true passive income besides investing with a good sponsor who's going to do the management side, who's going to do the active side of investing.
I agree.
And many people will say they need to be in real estate, and then they realize they just lock themselves into another job that maybe they don't have the time for. And that's the other way that things can go bad. So we're an advocate for passive investing, but doing it smart. And unfortunately, for so long now, people have been investing for the wrong reasons with the wrong people without any understanding of the risks that they're really taking on.
No, you're right. I've got some good partners that I've had for years, decades really, and we've bought rental houses and sold them, and it is not fun being a landlord. I hate getting calls about problems with the home. I don't like that at all. The benefit of being a passive investor is you don't have to deal with that, right?
Right.
You don't have to be a landlord.
Yeah.
You can put your money at work for you and be passive, not have to do much work.
And many of these syndicators are giving up majority of the profits. We're talking, 70, 80% of the profits are going to you as the passive investor.
Right. The really good sponsors are the ones who know that if they perform well for their investors, those investors will come with them to the next project.
Yeah.
You want sponsors who have a history of repeat investors. Those are the ones you want.
Absolutely. So let's recap some of them. What's your waterfall? What's your backup plan? What's your team look like?
Can you stand for the long haul?
Stand for the long haul.
The capital call provisions.
What
The
are the
consequences if you don't pay your share of the capital call? Do your due diligence. Is this something you should be doing to begin with? Are you in a financial position to really risk money?
Well, and I love that you said if you are paying 12% on debt, I would invest if I had debt, but how many people might be out there getting are you at debt?
Right.
Yeah.
Smart.
Your debts.
Look at the big picture before you do anything.
It's a guaranteed return when you pay down your debt.
Right.
Everything else is risky,
Yep.
Yeah,
not guaranteed.
that makes sense.
And we do love passive investing, but there is a way to do it.
And we are advocating for the passive investor and promoting good sponsors. And we will continue to do that and bring services, like the secondary marketplace that really align the interests of both the passive investor and their sponsors so that we can make this a even better asset class than it's already been.
I love it. It's a great mission. Kudos to you.
Yeah. And thank you for being with us, Paxton. It's been
welcome.
a very insightful conversation.
Yeah, we'll talk more at the next poker game.
Absolutely, we will.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, folks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you are a passive investor and you're wondering where you can go to find great opportunities, head over to Pre-iShares website and look at our listing hub. Not only can you find fractional shares of existing real estate syndications, you can also find some of our approved sponsors and current offerings that they may have. Plus, we have the Pre-iShare Fund, which is a very diversified way to be invested in all kinds of different asset classes, sponsors, and geographies.